This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We're coming to you live from Pulse Technologies in Carroll Stream, part of our AM 560 Signature Bank Business Tour. And we discussed, obviously, in great detail yesterday the attack on the synagogue in San Diego. And in that context, we were also drawn to this cartoon, not even a cartoon, propaganda, I guess is probably a better word, showing Bibi Netanyahu as a dog with a Star of David or a collar.
It's repulsive.
Leading, or being walked by and leading, a blind Donald Trump. Well, the cartoonist has responded, and he's defending the cartoon, saying, quote, it's a critique of Israeli policy, which has a criminal conduct in Palestine at the expense of the UN and not the Jews. His name is Antonio Moreira Antunes, who goes by Antonio. He gave an interview to a Portuguese paper where he works. He went on to say, the reading I made is that Netanyahu's politics, whether by the approach of elections or by being protected by Trump, who changed the embassy to Jerusalem by recognizing the city as capital, and which first allowed the annexation of the Golan Heights after the West Bank and more annexations in Gaza, which means a burial of the Oslo Accord. It represents an increase in verbal, physical, and political violence. It's a blind policy that ignores the interests of the Palestinians, and Donald Trump is the blind man. The Star of David is an old identity, is an aid to identity, to identify a figure that is not very well known in Portugal. New York Times has apologized for it, but that is not enough, according to Jonathan Greenblatt, who is the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League on CNN. He had this to say.
Let's stop dignifying it as a cartoon. It, like you said, it is propaganda. It wouldn't surprise me if this was published out of Tehran or Damascus, but it doesn't belong in the New York Times or any credible media outlet. And as we were talking about earlier, there was a shooting this weekend, the second in 6 months at a synagogue. And the shooter, in his manifesto, talked about myths of Jewish control and Jewish manipulation. And then they print this propaganda that literally exhibits stereotypes that suggest Jewish control and Jewish propaganda. Look, sometimes anti-Semitism is overt, like white men screaming in Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us. Sometimes it's thinly veiled, like this in the pages of the New York Times. But it is unacceptable anywhere.
The flip side, the pages of the New York Times, an op-ed from Rabbi Goldstein. The rabbi lost his finger in that shooting.
I love him.
This guy is...
He's amazing.
This guy's fantastic. And he built on what he did in those terrible moments when his synagogue was under attack, and then what he said afterwards. This is a really good op-ed. A terrorist tried to kill me because I'm a Jew. I will never back down, he writes. I pray that my missing finger serves as a constant reminder to me. A reminder that every single human being is created in the image of God. A reminder that I'm part of a people that has survived the worst destruction and will always endure. A reminder that my ancestors gave their lives so that I can live in freedom in America. And a reminder, most of all, to never, ever, not ever be afraid to be Jewish. From here on, I am going to be more brazen. I'm going to use my voice until I'm hoarse to urge my fellow Jews to do Jewish, to light candles before Shabbat, to put up mezuzahs on their doorposts, to do acts of kindness, and to show up in synagogue. And it goes on from there. I'll tweet it out at Dan Proft. It's definitely worth a read.
And real quickly, before we get to our guest, yesterday that rabbi presided over the funeral of Lori Kay, and her daughter, only daughter, Hannah, spoke.
I know my mother has already forgiven this man who shot her, not only because she had a profound and motherly capability to forgive me and our history together, but because her mission, how she lived her life, and her decision to preserve the life of the leader of the community, the children, all of us, automatically banishes the hatred that tried to take her light.
Because she did throw herself in front of the rabbi so he would not get shot. It's amazing.
It was. She's a hero, a martyr, really, for her faith. And it was poignant words from her daughter. And I hope her husband, too. I mean, again, if you didn't hear it, her husband is a doctor. He's called to attend to an injured congregant, doesn't know it's his wife until he sees his wife having been shot, and he fainted on the scene. I mean, it's just horror upon horror. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about hate crimes here, and some of the statistics. The ADL, you heard from their CEO, promotes the idea that there's been a significant spike in hate crimes directed at Jewish people, and we just want to make sure we're assessing the numbers correctly and honestly so that we're not creating hysteria despite these horrific incidents. You understand the scope, the magnitude of the problem. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Professor of Economics at Brooklyn College. He's Robert Cherry, who's written on the topic of some of these hate crime statistics. Professor, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
You wrote about some of the ADL stats back after the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh. And just to go through those, the ADL reported that there had been a 57% spike in anti-Semitic acts between 2016 and 2017. The FBI had reported a 17% increase in anti-Semitic hate crimes. And these numbers get picked up and then they're bandied about to suggest that there is an increasing problem. And the question is there really, or are there some textures to those numbers that we need to understand?
Well, I think there's some texture to those numbers, and in particular, the ADL numbers were based on a substantial increase in reporting, but were also spiked up by things that had particular kinds of dynamics that are worth mentioning. One thing is there was a doubling of campus incidents of anti-Semitic acts, and campus incidents are almost always perpetrated by left-wing anti-Israeli forces and Muslims who have an animus to Jews because of their actions, perceived and otherwise. And also, there was a doubling of intimidation, which was due to a disgruntled, disturbed Israeli Jewish youth who went on a spree of bomb threats to Jewish organizations in the U.S. When you looked at hate crimes, despite increased reporting, there was a decline in intimidation and assaults on Jews. So, it's really hard to say that there has been any kind of a spike in anti-Semitic crimes.
And this is just important in the context of the assertions by many in the D.C. press corps, many on the left, that somehow man-hating man under Trump for their religion or their racial identity is significantly increasing.
Yes, and particularly you look at anti-Muslim hate crimes, they went down in 2017 after tripling in the Obama years. If you look at anti-black hate crimes, they're half what they were a decade ago. So there really hasn't been that much of if anything, there's been a decrease in hate crimes. And lastly, when you look at hate crimes towards Latinos and particularly the LGBTQT community, they're really quite disproportionately done by Black Americans. If you take these anti-gay hate crimes, anti-lesbian, anti-transsexual hate crimes, for every five perpetrated by white Americans, there are 4 perpetrated by Black Americans. So, to try to link this stuff to Trump or that it's exclusively these white nationalists is really stretching and inappropriate.
And then yesterday we just had a deranged individual in Los Angeles area arrested, 26-year-old, who wanted to attack a white supremacist rally. So have you looked into, or have you thinking about looking into how many Christians are under attack? And we just also, too, had the horrible murders in Sri Lanka with 359 plus killed.
Well, I think, when you go to these attacks on synagogues, etc., I mean, these mass attacks are really done by individuals who have disgusting, to say the least, attitudes. But they don't, it's hard to generalize from them. That's why looking at FBI hate crime statistics give you a much broader sense of what's going on on these kind of everyday incidents. It's just to read into incidents. So we've had a number that have been done by people with white supremacist ideology, but then you get this yesterday Muslim, and that's what you had a couple of years ago. And, to try to read into those people, what is the general climate in the country, isn't very helpful.
And the coverage of it doesn't help much in terms of generating understanding or context either. You make the point in this one piece I'm referencing from you. A survey indicated that after the Tree of Life shooting, 72% of Jewish respondents linked the massacre to Trump's rhetoric, even though the killer in the Tree of Life shooting thought the president was too friendly and supportive of Jews. And we've had the same thing in the wake of the San Diego synagogue shooting. You have people talking about white supremacy or Trump's rhetoric. This guy hated Trump. I mean, he had a really colorful words for Trump in his social media posts. He hated Jews. He hated everybody. He's just an evil person, and it had nothing to do with our domestic politics.
Yeah. Let me just say one thing about the New York Times cartoon.
Sure.
It ends up that if you actually look at the situation of Arab citizens of Israel, there's been a remarkable increase in their economic, their occupational, and their educational attainment. If you take Technion Institute, which is the MIT of Israel, key to its economic success in high tech, people graduating from Technion, 26% of the students at Technion are Israeli Arabs. They get jobs in the high-tech center. Nazareth is a center for high-tech. If you look at teaching in public schools in Israel, in Jewish schools, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of Arab Israelis teaching in those schools. There are all kinds of evidence that within Israel, I'm not talking about the West Bank or Gaza policies, but within Israel, it is incredible how much the government, through affirmative action policies, have tried to integrate the Arab population into the economic and occupational mainstream. But you don't hear about that. You hear, so there's a lot of ways in which discussion of Jewish policies in Israel, of anti-Semitic acts in this country, are really distorted by a kind of anti-Trump mindset, an anti-Netanyahu mindset that just leaves out important information.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a fair point. He is Robert Cherry. He's an economics professor at Brooklyn College. And Professor Cherry, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. Have a great day.
You too.
Yeah, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. On AM 560, The Answer.